Francine Miller, Senior Staff Attorney at the Center for Agriculture and Food Systems at the Vermont Law School, will be our moderator today. During the event, please place any questions you have in chat. We will collect them throughout the hour, and Fran will present them during the Q&A at the end of our session. We ask that you please mute your microphone during this event. As I mentioned, this is the second event in a three-part series on alternative land ownership models. The series is taking place on Thursdays at 2 p.m. Eastern Time in September. Today, we will hear about innovative land access models, including community and agrarian trusts from an urban farmer and educator, Duron Chavis, and legal expert, Kristin King-Riess. The final installment of our session, our three-part series, will be next Thursday, where Jamie Flood and I will present equitable land access resources and tools for information and legal professionals. We hope you can join us next Thursday for that session. Please see the link in the chat to register. I would now like to introduce Fran Miller, Senior Staff Attorney at the Center for Agriculture and Food Systems at Vermont Law School.
Thank you, Kirsten. All right, I'm going to try to share my screen, everybody. Let's hope this works. Okay, you can, yay. All right, first things worked. Welcome, everyone, and thank you so much for attending our panel today. I'm so excited about this work that we're talking about, and I'm glad to introduce you all to it and to our amazing panelists, Kristin King-Riess and Duron Chavis. First, I'm just going to do a short introduction to our topic today, emerging models of land access. Then I'm going to introduce Kristin, who's going to talk generally about community land trusts and how they're being used to access agricultural land, especially by agrarian trust and the agrarian commons. And then I'll introduce Duron, who will talk about the creation of the Central Virginia Agrarian Commons, the continuing work there and other efforts that he's involved in around land access. So a quick intro to the Center for Ag and Food Systems. We train law and policy students in food and agriculture policy by teaching classes in the field, experientially by partnering with organizations to develop free legal resources for policymakers, farmers, consumers, and other stakeholders in the food system. And our students get legal and master's degrees in food and ag policy, and they work in our legal clinic with partner organizations doing research and advocacy. Please do check out our website. We have so many resources. Today, we're going to talk about legal issues around farmland access, but CAF's projects really span the food system. We recently launched the Food System Worker Law and Policy Project, which is the report shown at the left there, Exposed and at Risk. It focuses on farm workers and the health risks they face from pesticides and from heat. The Labels Unwrapped project includes a whole lot of information about food labels, and it's really for anyone who wants to better understand labels, which can just be so confusing and sometimes deceptive. And the last guide here is part of our Healthy Food Policy Project. We discuss language that's used to describe efforts to create just and equitable food systems, focusing on the phrases food justice, food sovereignty, and food apartheid. And it builds on definitions from people working on these issues on the ground. So to the subject at hand today, we're focusing on land access and in particular, emerging land ownership models, which really are being used to make land more accessible to farmers with limited resources, including new and beginning farmers and farmers of color, especially those without capital. And I've been working on this issue as part of our work to expand the farmland access legal toolkit, which you're seeing on this slide, which you can find at farmlandaccess.org. We have a page in the toolkit on land trusts, which talks about the various ways that people can access land by working with land trusts. There's a few different types of land trusts, which include conservation land trusts, which generally protect land from development. There's community land trusts, which are generally used for affordable housing development. And then there's community land trusts holding agricultural land, which is really what we're focusing on today. I'm gonna leave the detail on these types of land trusts to Kristin to talk about. I just want you all to know that we're creating resources to help people understand the legal concepts here. And all of us who are speaking today, me and Kristin and Duron, are working with Agrarian Trust, which is a national nonprofit land trust that's further developing this model. And we're really excited about it as a tool to give access to land to underserved communities. So without further ado, let me introduce Kristin King-Riess. Kristin is a legal expert in community land trusts. She's been on the board of Trust Montana. She's worked with other community land trusts. She now has a private legal practice representing community land trust clients and other nonprofits, including Agrarian trusts. After she speaks, I'm going to introduce Duron. I would ask that you put any questions in the chat, as Kirsten said, and we'll do some Q&A after they both have spoken. It's all yours, Kristin.
Thanks, Fran. Those are great resources on your website, by the way. So anybody who's looking to do this work, I highly recommend checking that out. So why do we need alternative models to access land? What's wrong with this model? Farm income doesn't cut it. Small and medium-sized farmers who own land often don't make enough to cover operating costs. Sorry, I can't see my little tiny print there. Oh well, I'll just read. Today's farmers are retiring. Many are rich with land and poor in cash, and they're selling the land to developers as the only way to fund their retirement. New farmers can't afford land. Many of today's farmers rely on short-term leases with no security. They build up the soil and the infrastructure on someone else's property, and then if and when the lease is up, they have to leave it behind with nothing to show. Farmers of color still face discrimination in spite of 2 massive class action lawsuits spanning 25 years. The USDA has repeatedly discriminated against Black farmers when it comes to offering loans, disaster relief, and other resources available to white farmers. And that's true for other farmers of color as well. The CLT model is a flexible tool, as you can see from this definition. It's most commonly used to create affordable home ownership opportunities, but it can be used on any type of land to support a wide range of purposes, which includes facilitating access to farming and farmland for people who've been excluded or otherwise have not been able to afford it. CLTs are sometimes referred to as shared equity model, but I'm not using that term here because shared equity housing, at least, encompasses both community land trusts and cooperatives, and I'm not covering cooperatives today, just CLTs. How does the lease work? Like this, or how does the CLT work? The lease between the farmer and the CLT is called the ground lease. So the CLT purchases farmland, and then it enters into a long-term lease with the farmer. The lease guarantees long-term tenure and a lease fee that the farmer can afford based on farm income. The ground lease spells out terms of the relationship between the parties. And these terms include restrictions that keep improvements affordable for the next farmer. And I'll talk about improvements a little bit in a minute. But basically it just means buildings or anything on top of the land. In exchange for the benefits, the farmer agrees to abide by the restrictions. It's a version of paying it forward. The asterisks here for the terms just is an indication that the length of the long-term ground lease depends on state law. So in some states, it's as short as 10 years, but In many states, it's 75, some states 99, and in a couple of states, 150 years long. So these leases are quite a bit longer than your standard farm lease. In the case of housing CLTs, the improvements usually come in the form of a home or a condo. And when you sell, the portion of the money you pay toward the mortgage comes back to you, plus a small profit, whatever the restricted resale formula is. I love showing people how this works in detail, but I will refrain for this presentation. If you're interested in learning more about how the numbers work, send me an email and I will share those with you. I'll share a chart with you, and also happy to talk about it. CLT farms are not nearly as common as housing CLTs, and it's not yet clear what the improvements or equity sharing tools will be. CLTs are exploring not only having farmhouses, but also barns, outbuildings, infrastructure, and other business property, including solar and wind generators. Building equity happens when the farmer buys the improvements and the money they would be paying in rent and never seeing again goes towards that mortgage instead. Key structural elements of a CLT. Governments can do deed restricted housing programs that provide access to affordable home ownership, and they could no doubt be used to do the same for farming. I haven't seen such a program yet, but drawbacks to government programs include the fact that there's no community governance with these programs, and they lack ongoing stewardship of a CLT. Finally, and most dramatically, they can disappear when there's a change in leadership. A nonprofit CLT has a mission, a long-term mission, to support the community and the farmers and to work together to run the organization in a way that's mutually beneficial. Some of the key legal elements. Separating the land from the improvements. This is just, it's a legal fiction, I suppose, where the title agents separate out the land from the improvement in terms of what's considered a tax parcel and whether you can get a mortgage on it. Then the CLT is able to keep ownership of the land and have that in the program. This also keeps the farmland in farming. And all of the investment dollars and subsidy that have gone into this work will stay with that land in perpetuity. And CLTs, if you're familiar with them at all, require investment on the front end. And they pay back in, in huge quantities on the back end. But that front end investment is real, and you have to be aware of that. The affordability restrictions, on the other hand, keep the buildings affordable for the next farmer and the next. They include these resale restrictions and also require certain qualifications for people to be able to be a leaseholder and to buy the improvements. A final tool that can be used for farmland CLTs are conservation easements. And conservation easements can be great because you can get, the CLT can get money for selling the development rights for something they're not planning to do anyway. Meaning they're not planning to build a bunch of build homes, subdivisions, whatever, commercial property. On the other hand, you need to be aware that when you have a conservation easement, the building restrictions are pretty strict. And so you want to make sure you have all the buildings that you want on it before you put an easement there. Here's a review of the benefits. CLTs need subsidies to get started, like donations, grants, low interest loans, volunteer labor, etc. And by owning the land and keeping the prices affordable, they preserve that subsidy and can pass on the affordability to farmers in perpetuity. The first CLT was a farm. In 1970, New Communities Inc., bought a 5,700 acre farm in rural Georgia. And it was created by a group of civic leaders, civil rights organizers, activists. The farm had schools, businesses, churches. It was an incredible community effort. It faced discrimination and violence from the very beginning, starting with attacks by the Klan And in 1971, the year after it started, the governor of Georgia blocked federal funds that had been committed for the development. Despite seemingly insurmountable challenges, new communities survived for 15 years before facing foreclosure in 1985. In 1997, Timothy Pickford and 400 other African-American farmers filed suit against Dan Glickman, the US Secretary of Agriculture at the time. Plaintiffs alleged the USDA treated Black farmers unfairly when allocating price support loans, disaster payments, farm ownership loans, and operating loans. New communities joined that class action suit. And in 2007, after a decade of being rebuffed by the USDA, they were awarded a settlement of $12 million. CLTs, not surprisingly, moved into urban areas. Some urban CLTs included small farms on their land to improve homeowner quality of life, and in some cases, ways to earn income. But there were very few CLT farms after new communities. And most of those were on the East Coast. CLT farms are still not plentiful. Excuse me. Some of the groups that offer support are listed here, and there are many others. There's been lots of interest in recent years, and an increasing number of CLTs are adding farms to their programs. Even urban housing CLTs are doing these things. Conservation land trusts around the country are also getting involved by helping out with things like buying land for a group that needs fund to gather their funding, holding that until they have time to do so. Community-supported farming in action. Agrarian Commons. Fran mentioned this group earlier. In 2016, a national nonprofit was formed called Agrarian Trust. And in 2020, Agrarian Trust began implementing Agrarian Commons program using a hub and spokes model. So the Agrarian Trust would acquire the land and put it into a title holding tax exempt entity with the help of local farmers and community members. Then the AC, the Agrarian Commons, it leases the farms to local farmers and has local farm representation on the board. I think Duron is going to talk more about the details of how those work. What I have here are some stats on things that they've accomplished in the last 2 years. And I won't read all of them. I'll just point out a few that are really exciting and kind of astonishing to me. At the moment, they have 8 farms in 6 states for 7 Agrarian Commons. They have a total of 12 Agrarian Commons, so there are other projects in the work as we speak. And donors for the Agrarian Commons work from 48 states and several countries. It is truly a group effort to try to get this done. The Community Land Trust model offers ways to bring together communities to save small and mid-sized farms, break down barriers for BIPOC farmers, and shift agriculture's focus from land ownership to land stewardship. And those of you who are part of the USDA, if you are interested in supporting this model, you can use the power of the USDA to educate people about it. Thank you so much for listening.
Thank you so much, Kristin. And I just want to add, we're all working this. Like, Kristin is an expert on CLT. She knows a lot about legal issues that come up. But this model that we're developing with Agrarian Trust and that other people are developing around the country trying to develop commons models is relatively new in this era. So if you have resources, ask a lot of questions. We don't know everything. We're learning too. So I just wanted to add that to the presentation. So Duron Chavis is an urban farmer and educator who works in Richmond, Virginia. Duron is on the boards of the Central Virginia Agrarian Commons, which he's helped to found, and also on the Maggie Walker Community Land Trust. And Duron is going to talk with us about all of his work. Thanks, Duron.
All right. Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for just giving a real strong overview of what this stuff is about. Today I'm just gonna kind of give you the case study, like the example of what this stuff is looking like. As Francine indicated, I am on the board of the Central Virginia Agrarian Commons, as well as the Maggie Walker Community Land Trust. So today I'm going to talk about the Central Virginia Agrarian Commons, but an addendum to the talk is just a little bit about the work that we do with the Maggie Walker Community Land Trust as well. I thought it'd be appropriate to kind of toss that in. Just a little context and history about where this work came from. So I personally, in my organization, we've been farming in our area, in our region, or involved in food system work in our system since 2008. And that included pop-up farmers markets, development community gardens, urban farms, etc., throughout the region. In the last, I'd say, 6 years or so, a lot of that work has been, I wouldn't say impeded, but there's just been challenges around land access and land tenure. Probably about 6 years ago, 5 years ago, I joined the board of the Maggie Walker Community Land Trust, which is CLT in the capital in Richmond, Virginia, that focuses specifically on affordable housing. Their motto is as Kristin laid out, the preservation of affordable housing through the land trust owning the actual land, and then community member, first-time homeowner purchasing the above ground improvement of the actual home, and using that as a tool strategy for wealth building or a strategy for getting people into their first home. When I joined the board, my main focus in that space was, okay, there was a secondary priority, and that was the development of public green space and how the Maggie Walker Community Land Trust could utilize land that it was getting from the municipal government as a community asset in the form of public green space. And I'll tell you a little bit more about how that's manifested later on in the talk. But I insert that in the history and the context of this work around the Central Virginia Agrarian Commons, because it was only because I was on the board for the Maggie Walker Community Land Trust that I could even begin to fathom the potential for what the Agrarian Trust was attempting to do in the formation of these agrarian commons. Okay, I had to see it to believe it, right? How we got introduced to the Agrarian Trust, going to conferences and things like that, they would be tabling at some of these functions. And I sat in on a workshop that they held at the Virginia Association for Biological Farming, probably 2000 and, I think it was like 19 or so, right before the pandemic. And in the session, they talked about how they wanted to redistribute land to BIPOC communities and remove farmland from the speculative real estate market. And because of my familiarity with what the Maggie Walker Community Land Trust have been doing with affordable housing, like it clicked. I was like, okay, I get this. This is of import. In that same workshop, there was a woman by the name of Callie Walker who had met at other conferences who was desirous of donating her land to BIPOC farmers, Black or brown farmers. So all those things kind of converge at that moment. But then at the same time, just remember, having farmed and been farming in the city for a while up to that point, we had experienced those issues, right? Might have an agreement with a landowner, because we don't necessarily got deep pockets in terms of purchasing property in the city. And we've seen several times over, the owner of those properties change decisions and get enticed by developers to opt out of the farming that we were doing on those spaces to create apartments or restaurants or even parking lots, just like reverting it back to a parking lot for that particular owner at the time was a more financially lucrative move for them. So, you know, we had already been dealing with these issues of land access and land tenure. So this idea of land being permanently removed from the speculative real estate market and made provisional for Black or brown farmers exclusively or explicitly in perpetuity was very enticing. And, you know, we just wanted to figure out how we can make that work. In addition to that, you know, as an urban farmer, I've never been under any impression that it was the urban core farming that was going to be the solution to feeding entire cities and regions, that these food systems that we have to redevelop and or create altogether are inextricably linked to rural farming. And in the case of Black farmers, we were already familiar with the plight of Black farmers in our community, and that their struggle was that, okay, they're farming sometimes 30, 45 an hour outside of the urban core, and just didn't have the time to develop those supply chains with the urban core, right? So this lack of connectivity was an issue as well. And then, you know, the other piece was that there was, well, in the beginning, before starting this work, there was no formal entity to hold land that the Agrarian Trust could partner with. So our work starts there, right? Taking all these issues into consideration, all this prior knowledge, and we're like, okay, how do we do this? The bringing together of Callie Walker, myself, and the folks from the Agrarian Trust was just a quick couple of phone calls, and it was like, hey, look, you know, here we have Callie Walker. She's trying to give away this 80 acres that's 45 minutes outside of the city. We have Duron and our organization that's seeking to secure land tenure, long-term land tenure, and control over land in the urban sector. How do we bring these two spaces together? And the formation of the Central Virginia Agrarian Commons was the most feasible and clear way forward. So in December 2020, we decided to form the Central Virginia Agrarian Commons. The Agrarian Trust is the 501c3. The actual Central Virginia Agrarian Commons is a 501c2, explicitly created for land holding. So, you know, while we're not going around like massive fund capital raising and things like that, the partnership with the Agrarian Trust is that the Agrarian Trust serves as a collaborator that does primarily fundraising and provides legal support for the Agrarian Commons as an entity, which is a huge deal. I mean, I don't think people really can understand the ramifications to have predominantly white led organization to be explicit in its desire to redistribute land to Black and brown communities, and to be intentional in utilizing its networks of wealth and capital to redistribute those resources back into Black and brown communities is exactly what we need to be seeing more models of. In terms of the formation, the board initially is comprised, or the founding board is comprised of community members, people in our region, myself, other farmers, two other farmers, Renard Turner of Vanguard Ranch, Michael Carter of Carter Farms. Then we also have Callie Walker, who is the landowner, who wants to be supportive in this effort. And we also have members of the Agrarian Trust that serve on the board, or a member of the Agrarian Trust, Eliza Spellman, who serves on the board as well. So I'll just start with this 80 acres. So this is real life, y'all. We've been talking about how 98% of rural farmland is owned by white folks. But what do we do about that? What we saw with Callie is that here's this woman who's been involved with, I guess like the Quaker movement and other folks in her community. And she, had already come to this understanding that, white supremacy wasn't, was something that she was trying to divest from. And, her and her husband didn't have any children. And we're like, look, when we go, like, what happens to this land? They were like, yo, we want to make sure that it goes to Black folks. Amelia County in Virginia is extremely rural. It's atypical to many other rural communities. It's Trump country. It's the, I ride down the highway, the interstate to get there. I see the signs, even though, Trump's no longer in office, you still see, the Confederate flags and all that type of stuff in this part of in that part of the state. It's like the place I don't want to get pulled over after dark, you know what I mean? Just out of safety for myself. So, that also that's also a part of the context of this land is, right, the desire to center Black and brown folks as folks that can access this land for homesteading, for farm enterprises. Is like, we can't just leave, these folks out in the boonies with all of these alt-right folks out on the island unto themselves. So in the early stages of the conversations, like, there has to be an intimate link between the urban spaces that the Central Virginia Agrarian Commons acquires and these rural spaces. So this has been a pertinent conversation, a very clear and deliberate conversation. How do we make sure that these communities are intersecting and that they are supportive of one another, and the system is of them converging, synergizing, and feeding one another, right? The fact that it is 80 acres creates a unique opportunity, or created a unique opportunity that we could do both farming as well as homes. However, the zoning issues in rural Virginia are more amenable to very low density housing development, right? It's not exactly like what you see in the city where you can create, quarter acre or eighth of an acre lots that are, right up on each other and create blocks. Like, no, the folks in the county are like, no, I want 80 acres, 40 acres. I don't want no neighbors, right? I want to be able to walk out as far as my eyes can see and not be able to not engage with anybody. So when that word kind of got out that we were trying to do this, we had to engage with that, right? That the neighbors are not exactly friendly to Black or brown communities, right? Or that they were, it's the NIMBYism and otherism of communities of color in predominantly white spaces. We ran up on that face first. But that's not a problem. I mean, in accordance with the laws, we've figured out that we can build houses incrementally. And by incrementally, it's like, we could start with 4 homes on the property, on the entire 80 acres cumulative. And then over a course of successive, like 5 to 7 years, we can start to add additional homes, just using the law to, finding the loopholes in the law, so to speak. The Agrarian Trust has been supporting in that transfer of the donation by doing the deed work and the title transfer, as well as land survey work that needed to be done just to make sure that all the lines and borders of the property was in accordance with the county. So we're just now finishing up that process as we speak. It's been almost about a year getting all the stuff together, but it's I'm happy to say that it's finally moving. So this is a drone shot of the 80 acres. Well, it's like 40 of the 80 acres. The other 40 is not shown here, but it's heavily forested. But there are clear spaces that are there's next to it is a farm. That the farm that you see in this image is actually the neighbor of the property, but the remaining area is what belongs to the CVAC now. There's been some cattle grazing and things like that on the property. So we're actually going through a visioning process to come up with some master planning for the space. And what we're imagining is that there's multiple farm enterprises that exist on this property, in addition to homes and cold storage and processing, and most importantly, as a hub for the space, a retreat center that serves like a bed and breakfast, where folks that are looking to be trained or looking to train and or learn in the longitudinal fashion how to steward large acreage farms can actually spend time, reside, and host, and we can host trainings and etc. on that space. So pinning that second part of the work is this urban effort. So when I came along, my main thought was like, how do we acquire property in the urban core to complement this 80 acres that's been acquired in Amelia? And so, it was my job basically to try to identify the property, like what exactly was going to be the first piece of property we're going to fundraise for. And we went through a couple iterations of this. I mean, one of the first properties we were thinking of, the owner, he didn't understand, the community land trust model, even though we were like, yo, this is an opportunity for you to, be mortgage free and still be in collaboration with, other food system stakeholders. He just didn't get it. Well, maybe he did get it and just was like, nah, I'd rather, try to cash out on this thing, because of the housing market. At the moment we were trying to talk to him, is like the housing market was going crazy. So this is like 2021, 2020, late 2020. So irrespective of that, we were able to identify a piece of property that was already in our community. When I say my community, Petersburg, Virginia, I live in we work predominantly in Richmond, Virginia. So Petersburg is like 30 minutes outside of Richmond, but it's a place that we're familiar with. We've worked there. I used to work for Virginia State University. We did some work in the development of an indoor farm in Petersburg back in 2014. So it's just like going back to a space that we had already been working with. Plus, staff, members of our team have been operating in Petersburg and developing community gardens. We have been partnering with some developers that own loft apartments that had vacant lots next door to them. So basically, we were like already familiar with the lay of the land, and just so happened that a farmer that had been farming had retired in the outskirts of Petersburg, and had been kind of linked up with some of the nonprofit entities and wanted to try to keep it going, but just couldn't handle it. So he put his property on the market, and so we had heard about it and said, all right, boom, well, this might be the one. So we went ahead and hit him up. And the support from the Agrarian Trust came in quite handy. We were able to put the Agrarian Trust put down the $20K for the purchase option. And I think it was July, if I'm not mistaken. Maybe it was late June, July. And we immediately launched the fundraiser for the remainder of the purchase. I think it was at $160,000 that the owner of the property was asking for. So we put down 20 for the purchase option. We needed to turn it over and I think like 60 days. So by the end of August, we had raised $200,000 to made the purchase. I mean, we did get a bridge loan from one of our local CDFIs, a zero interest bridge loan. But I'm happy to say that we now are in possession of this 5-acre farm that's zoned agricultural. The Petersburg, what we're now calling the Petersburg Oasis community farm. Petersburg is #1 in child food insecurity in the state of Virginia, as far as local municipalities are concerned. So this is an image, the overhead drone shot of the land. As you can see from the street to the back, it's all flat, which is really amazing and really powerful. There's already a well on the property, and there was already a greenhouse on the property as well, which is even more amazing. So a lot of the infrastructure was already there, ready for us to utilize. Our vision for this space is that it serves as an educational farm, or with a segment of it dedicated to youth and community, but the remaining acreage of the space being broken up into plots and serving as an incubator farm for aspiring urban farmers that haven't the capital to get their efforts up off of the ground. Our vision is that the folks will be able to access 1/8 of an acre to 1/4 of an acre for their farm enterprise. And, you know, those can be, in the leases, we're aspiring for them to be 10 years plus, or at least 5 to 10 years for them to get their chops up and develop their relationship with their customer base, and then be able to move on to the Amelia property and acquire larger acreage, 2 acres, 1 acre, 3 acres for their to scale up their endeavor, right? So this is like the just to get your feet wet, you know, really to tap in and lock in your farm practices, develop that record of managing your business, because we know when you're starting to engage with the Farm Service Agency, being able to show that documentation that you have been farming, and these are the profits that you've been able to make. You know, this is the crops that you've been growing, etc. You know, in order to get those microloans, or even, you know, those larger farm service loans, to be able to acquire larger scales of property, you know, you need a place to be able to do that. So yeah, this is the incubator farm slash educational farm, Petersburg, Oasis. And what's great, my homie Duron Chavis is amazing. He was one of the first folks to come visit me when I was working at the Harding Street location, developing an indoor farm. He later came through one of our trainings, and, you know, I was able to hire him as a contract employee, develop a community gardens in our city, in Petersburg. And now he has longitudinal land tenure here on this space because of, you know, our collaboration, and because of the work that he's been dedicated to. So I'm really excited about he'll be the first resident farmer on the space. He just joined the board of the Central Virginia Agrarian Commons this month, so he's now in the mix with the power to really control his own destiny without having to worry about somebody swiping the land from underneath him. This is just another image. This is a video. I tried to flex on y'all a little bit. So this is a video. You see the video of the property? Yeah, try to get so you can understand the scope of what's going on. Yeah, so anyway. Boom. Let's see. How to get out of this. All right. So yeah, long and short, the Central Virginia Agrarian Commons, basically, like you said, it's like a hub and spokes model. The Agrarian Trust sits at the middle, but it's not a hierarchy. You know what I mean? This is true collaboration. Everything that we've done with them has been one where the Agrarian Trust has been like, yo, how do we support? What is it that y'all want to do? Let us know. Let's figure out how to move these needles forward. And primarily, again, like the fundraising support and legal support are areas that, you know, I couldn't shake a stick at. I personally didn't have like the legal expertise to be able to manage how to do deed transfers and etc., let alone the financial acumen or the financial, you know, familiarity to how that type of work works. But the folks at the Agrarian Trust do and have been very amenable and like helping us understand what this stuff is all about. But they primarily have been raising the funds for us to do the development for us to acquire the property. But they've also been supportive in the fundraise for the development of the property as well, because I think that's, you know, a big deal for folks is it's one thing to be able to acquire the land, but then once you have it, how do you get the farm infrastructure up that will be necessary for you to farm efficiently and optimally? Like, you know, nobody's gonna be farming 5 acres or a 1/4 acre or even a 1/2 acre of land by hand. Like, do you have a BCS? Are you, you know, do you have high tunnels? Do you have drip irrigation set up, automated? You know, what's the system? So those types of supports in terms of the infrastructure are also a part of our collaboration. The members of the board are urban as well as rural, which is important because, again, these are people that a big part of this work is, people actually having familiarity and knowledge of one another. So right now on the board, we got one of the employees or former employees of the Maggie Walk Community Land Trust, myself, farmer Renard Turner, Michael Carter, and now Tyrone, as well as Callie. And then we did Jillian Hickshaw was on our board, but she resigned recently. So yeah, it's been an amazing ride. The donors have been very supportive of the work, but we're also working with local conservation easement organizations to acquire additional development funds. And the Agrarian Trust has been very supportive in that work as well, and us co-writing or putting in application for funds to put the Petersburg property under conservation easement as our initial foray into this conservation space. But we're also looking to put some of the acreage in the 80-acre donation under conservation easement as well, and using that as funding for the development of the space. Just a couple of considerations before I jump into the other piece. It's going to be really short. One of the challenges is that people don't understand, or it's been challenging to help people understand that in the agrarian commons model, the land is owned by the community. So we're so used to individual ownership, right? That expressing to people that, okay, you get the benefit of the land and being able to steward that land without anybody being able to move you off it because of this long-term lease that you're implementing. But as an individual, you're not getting that equity in the actual land, right? That's not a part of this play. And that there are plays that can be made. Like this might not be for you, right? This is a strategy that can be utilized to help build food system equity. However, if your interest is in like, how do I get control of the ground land and then be able to use that land as equity for and leverage that equity for other investments or what have you, this might not be the strategy for you, right? And that's fine. That's not saying that this is bad or good or what you're trying to do is bad or good. It's just saying that this is a play that might not work in what you're trying to do. And articulating that to people on the front end and helping them understand that this type of strategy, this particular type of work, community land trust in general, is a Black strategy that, people like Shirley Sherrod and Charlie Sherrod with New Communities are the pioneers of this work, has been a part of our work. Like, yo, this is our stuff, okay? Like, I get it. You like, oh yeah, I don't own it. It's like, no, but it's bigger than you as an individual owning it. How does your community own it? And how do we remove it from the real estate market? Because even if you own it as an individual, it's still in the real estate market, because if a developer come with a big enough bag, are you trying to tell me that you as an individual, you're going to pass upon that bag in service of the greater community? I don't know. It's a little fragile to have people's word on that, right? You dig what I'm saying? So anyway, that's a piece of the puzzle. The land use is facilitated through long-term lease agreements. So that means that, helping folks to understand lease agreements, and understand what they're going to have to show up with, things like insurance, you know what I mean? And also like payments, like what is a solidarity payment? Like, or do you need to do a payment? Like, or should it be a percentage of what you grow in a year? Like working with people on a case-by-case basis to kind of wrap their brain around how this works, how this can work for their particular enterprise is also very key. Because like, some folks are farming and they don't even have insurance, quiet as kept, which is, risky, you know what I'm saying? Because people are litigious. So try to, help people also understand that. And then, if they don't have the insurance up the front, like, can they work? Like our organization, like my own nonprofit, the nonprofit I steward, Happening Natural Day, we do have insurance. So working with the people like Tyrone, be like, Tyrone, look, I know you don't have your LLC, you don't have a 501c3. I'll be your fiscal sponsor. We have insurance, you can fall under that, and until you get on your feet and you get your own stuff, right? So and stressing that our goal is for him or anybody to have full autonomy in a situation, that any type of collaboration in that regard is just short term, with the bigger vision for them to be self-determining, right? Also, that equity can be built in the above ground improvements, as Kristin was speaking to. Like if you put a high tunnel, a greenhouse, a barn, a tiny home, like this stuff has value, right? And that, it's yours. If you put it in there, it belongs to you. So, people's mindset around equity is usually locked into like a home, you know what I mean, or building a house. But there are other, the improvements above ground do have value for those who own them, and that you do own the above ground improvements. Oh, and a note to this also is that we're not just looking for farmland, we're also looking for commercial properties in the city as well. So that's not, so this work is, as far as the Central Virginia Agrarian Commons is concerned, it's not just limited to farmland. We're also striving, part of our vision is for us to acquire warehouses in the city, storefronts, etc. Talked about the conservation easement and how we access it. We're accessing capital through that. Housing in the rural subject to zoning laws, but we are trying to imagine, like, okay, we on our application for the Petersburg property, we said we're going to put 4 of those acres under easement and then leave 1 acre open, with the possibility that we might be able to put housing on that, in the long term. And then lastly, like, this work requires deep levels of transparency and community trust building. I'm gonna hurry up, speed through this. This is the I work for the also the Maggie-Walk Community Land Trust. We're working on an agri-hood, which is a neighborhood that has a farm at the center of the development. We just got a grant through the USDA for planning for this, so I would be remiss if I didn't mention it. This is 9 acres in Chesterfield, which is right outside of Richmond, that we are currently working towards the development of a housing development, 9 homes that has a farm as an amenity, where the farm basically sells produce to the folks that are in residents of the neighborhood, but in the greater neighborhood as at large, as kind of like a hybrid CSA kind of program. And this is the conceptual master plan that we've gotten up to that point in that work on. But more to be said about that. Some land trusts are doing just farmland, some are doing just affordable housing. In the case of the Maggie Walker Community Land Trust, we're doing both. And that there are spaces that, both of these social inequities can cross, and you can, kill 2 birds with 1 stone, for lack of a better adage. And that's it. That's all I got.
That's all? That's all you're doing, Duron?
That's all I got going on. Well, it's more than that, but that's what I got for today.
Thank you so much for all of that passion and information. Really, you and your people are doing some great work in Virginia there. And thank you to you and to the Agrarian Trust for being so supportive of the work, and the relationship that you all are building is something. And I think that last bullet on your slide about transparency and deep community building trust, yeah. I think that's a really key point of all of this work, because it's not just about handing over the deed.
Yeah, for sure.
So we have some questions. We have very little time here, but one question, Duron and Kristin both, and anybody else from Agrarian Trust who's on here. Duron, have you dealt with the issue of how you're going to choose who the farmers are going to be? Like you said, there's going to be multiple agricultural enterprises on the land and retreat and this and that. How are you all figuring that out?
Yeah, so for the 80 acres, it's a little bit more complex than it is for the urban space. the 80 acres, the Amelia property, again, like its context is unique. So there's like farmers, there are people that are already farming, that are ready to farm on a larger scale, that have been engaged or that have been at least expressed interest in the effort. But the challenge is that, you know, that means that we're gonna have a home is gonna have to be built for, or someone will have to have the capital to actually build a home on the property until we acquire the capital to do that, and then be able to self-finance someone in that regard. So right now that's still in limbo. Our main vision is that it'd be folks that are experienced in farming, that want to participate in kind of like a cooperative farming endeavor in that regard. So we're still ironing out those issues. But in terms of the 5 acres, because it is urban and it's a little bit more easier for folks to find housing in that regard, we said we would do a training program, and that will be for individuals that come through the training program will be able to access the land, kind of like first dibs. If you come through our training, you'll be able to access it. But then if you already got an endeavor that you're trying to do and you already have kind of like a track record, then we can work out, you know, a lease situation for you in that regard as well. That's why we decided to make the parcels 1/8 of an acre or 1/4 of an acre, because we knew we can get about 6 to 8 parcels, playing with the numbers in terms of the size. So right now we got a couple folks that are farming currently, right? But they're farming in areas that are further out than Petersburg, who are you know, trying to get their situation together in terms of insurance. In fact, there's a hemp farmer, right? This gentleman that grows hemp, or a team of gentlemen that grow hemp, and they're like, yeah, we just can't find the insurance because we're growing hemp, and so people are not consider us a risk. So trying to figure that out with those types of folks. So yeah, I hope that answered the question. It's still we're still in limbo trying to figure it out for the Amelia property, but for the Petersburg, it's a little bit easier.
Kirsten, can I ask one more question?
Yes.
This is kind of off of Duron's answer, Kristin. There was a question earlier about financing for improvements that are built on CLT land and whether there are issues there. Can you get financing from FSA or Farm Credit or other commercial lenders? And, you know, are there special considerations there?
Yeah, really quickly, there are riders to mortgages. Fannie Mae was the first like national organization to come up with a rider for community land trust property. That made a huge difference. Before that, financing had to be sort of, you know, with your local bank or, you know, somebody who is willing to work with you and hold the loan in-house. But yeah, now there are lots of tools for getting traditional financing for those buildings.
Okay, cool. Kristin, do you want, wait, Kristin. Kirsten,
Yes.
do we have time for another, or are we wrapping up?
It's 2:59 Eastern time. I think we can do one more. If people need to drop off, that's understandable. Let's do one more.
Okay.
It's been such a robust discussion.
An earlier question was, can an already established nonprofit become a community land trust, or is it better to have a nonprofit that is only a community land trust? That's probably a question for Kristin.
Well, I think you can do both. You can be a community land trust already. There's the way that Duron talked about it, there's one sort of landholding entity that involves individual members, the C2 that he mentioned. There's also something called the 501c25, which means that it's organizations are the members that form the agrarian commons. And then as for organizations that are nonprofits, but that want to become community land trusts, yeah, that's absolutely feasible to do. Just involves paperwork. It is so cool, Duron, to see all this theoretical stuff being played out in a way that's really inspiring. So, yeah,
Thank you.
thanks.
And it's gone.
Thank you, everybody.